Jack Thunder and the Fragments of Anima. Book 4. Earth. Chapter 1. Nemesis Returns. The forest was silent save for a frosty breeze billowing through bare branches. Winter had returned to Ygdrassil, and all its little creatures had settled down, wrapped in their warm winter blankets. This was a time of rest and rejuvenation for the land, a time of peace and relaxation. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last. Out of nowhere, a chilling gale picked up. Piles of snow fell and splattered on the ground, freed from the hold of the barren tree branches holding them in place. The clear night sky became overshadowed by thundering clouds. Only these were no ordinary storm clouds. These were as black as night and thundered with red and black lightning. They parted, exposing a rift in the sky, glowing the color of a fresh wound and exposing dark shadows swirling within. From this rift, a single black blob fell from the sky. It blew a crater in the snow as it landed, standing up tall and straight. A beast in the shape of a Yule goat, with a ram's skull for a head and cloven feet. Around its neck was a red and gray cape with a high mantle. The figure opened its blood-red eyes. Ha! About time. I was starting to think I'd never get out of there, Nemesis rasped. Now, how do I get into Yggdrassil's grove? Getting back to Ygdrassil was one thing. Infiltrating Yggdrassil's grove was quite another. Nemesis hadn't forgotten how difficult it would be with Yggdrassil's heartwood. How was it supposed to get into the grove if it couldn't get close to the heartwood? Fortunately for Nemesis, sneaking around was what Wendigos did best. It just had to latch onto one of the grove's residents and then work from the inside. Once it had drained the land a bit, it would gain strength and the heartwood would weaken enough to where Nemesis could walk around freely. Then there would be nothing stopping it from grabbing the earth fragment Terra before those kids could. But how was it going to do that? It looked around for a host. It walked some distance through the Emerald Woodland, but it could hardly find anyone at this time of night. Nemesis should have guessed. The wood elves and dryads living in Yggdrasil's grove should have all been asleep at this time of night. Should have all been asleep. Nemesis could see a light hidden in the trees up ahead. It followed them to a clearing where a single dryad with green apples hanging off his head branches was. He was juicing the last few apples in his barrel before he went to bed. Ugh, it's finally done. Wouldn't have taken me so long if I had Sweet to help, but no. He said that he was going to celebrate in the grove. I swear, just because it's almost the Winter Solstice doesn't mean that he can just ditch work like that. This whole season's gotten to everyone's heads. He's perfect, Nemesis thought. He's frustrated with his brother and dislikes the Winter Solstice. At least I got it all done tonight. I'm gonna bring this into Yggdrasil's grove tomorrow, and when I do, I'm gonna give Sweet what— Ow! Sour Apple swatted his neck as a sharp pain pricked at it. It was almost like a mosquito bit him, but there weren't any mosquitoes at this time of year. He shrugged it off and went inside. Little did he realize that Nemesis had latched onto him. The Wendigo lay awake inside the dryad's body as Sour Apple fell asleep. It had a host and a way into the grove. Tomorrow, it would put its next step into action. Jack Thunder sighed. Still no sign of the other fragments. It had been 3 months since Shadowpaws had joined the team. They had gone into the Dark Carnival expecting a good time, but came out with something better. Namely, the Fragment of Darkness, Lethal Joke, and their newest crew member. The tuxedo-furred Nekomata had a hard time getting used to the storms on Jack Thunder's native Tempest Island, but he seemed to have come around. Things had been rather quiet since then. Jack Thunder spent most of his time in his room or in the Tempest Island dojo, poring over books and trying to find any sign of the other 3 anima fragments. So far, he'd come up empty. He stopped to take a breather when Razor chirped at him. Looking over, he noticed a faint thrumming next to him. His staff, the air fragment Stormbringer, resonated with a green light. Jack Thunder's stomach jumped. For a second, he thought the Wendigos had returned to Tempest Island. But as he looked at Stormbringer, he noticed the aura's color was off. Rather than the bright green it glowed when it sensed a Wendigo, its aura shone a slightly deeper shade of green. Almost a forest green. Forest green, forest green. That was the color of earth magic. The storm gremlin flipped back to the page on the earth fragment, Terra. An axe woven from the branches of Ygdrassil. Ygdrassil? Where were they now? Jack Thunder ran outside, all the way to the edge of the island. Below him, he could see an expanse of bare, gnarled branches. Almost directly below was a tree much taller than the others, still bearing all of its leaves. That must be Ygdrassil. We're in the Emerald Woodland again. Jack Thunder was a bit confused. Why didn't it sense this when I fell there the first time? He remembered how he had fallen from the sky into the brush of the Emerald Woodland when he'd tested out the staff for the first time. He almost chuckled at the memory. It seemed so long ago now. But he didn't remember seeing Ygdrassil when he fell down there. I must not have been close enough for Stormbringer here to catch it. Hey, Jack? Is your fragment glowing too? He turned around. Buckthorn and Shadowpaws had found him. Sure enough, the Seastone and Lethal Joke were also surrounded by a forest green glow. It wasn't just him. He nodded. They had their lead. Now it was time to follow it. Chapter 2. Season's Greetings. San shook his head to clear it. At least he tried to land on his feet this time. Since he'd joined Jack Thunder on his journey, he'd been traveling by rainbow a lot more often than he ever had. Sliding down rainbows was the easy part. Landing was quite another story. This time, he landed on his left side. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt. He brushed himself off. Why can't he just use a cloud like a normal person? Shadowpaws hadn't fared much better. For a cat, his landing wasn't all that graceful. He had landed smack on his face, just like San did the first time. Razor landed right on top of him. He got to his feet and stood up, embarrassed but thankfully unhurt. Evening had fallen in the Emerald Woodland. The sky bled a crystalline red, while glittering snow blanketed the ground. Twisting, black, leafless trees obscured their view. Winter had conquered the once verdant forest. The crew made their way through the forest. Jack Thunder, pulled by Stormbringer, trudged through the depths of the snow. Despite his difficulty walking and the bitter, biting cold, he felt warm inside. December had to be one of his favorite months of the year, aside from April. While Tempest Island's village didn't have any big traditions for the solstice, he could always count on the lands he visited when he went down to the surface to host extravagant celebrations where everyone was invited. Yggdrasil's grove was no exception. The dryads, wood elves, pixies, and forest sprites that made their homes there always decorated the entire town in white and blue lights that could be seen even from Tempest Island. He'd even seen the Elder Goat visit the grove a couple of times. He and Frosty didn't have much, but he could always count on the Elder Goat to make his Winter Solstice wishes come true. Jack Thunder began to hum a familiar tune. San and Shadowpaws immediately recognized it. It was a traditional Winter Solstice carol sung throughout the many nations of Alterus. As time went on, Jack Thunder's humming became louder and louder until he started singing. The abominable snowman was a fierce and mighty beast. And with his wood-gnarled horns and his saber teeth, he would make you into a feast. Soon, everyone in the group was singing a song about the abominable snowman who came to town. When they were done, they sang about Helios the Pegacorn guiding the elder goat along his way. And when they finished that song, they sang about all the presents they received on the 12 days of the solstice. Even Buckthorn, who had never heard these songs before, joined in. All of a sudden, a voice called out to them from the shadows. They stopped singing as soon as they heard it. "Hello there. Didn't expect to see you again." Jack Thunder paused. That voice was oddly familiar. It was a voice he'd heard only a few months ago. "Scylla? Is that you?" Right on cue, the forest dragon emerged from the shadows. She was still wearing the same ruby earrings she wore on the day she helped Jack Thunder quell the storm he'd created. But there was another familiar face next to her, too. One fairy snail with a pink shell and light blue eyes. "Snotter?" The snail nodded. She had changed a lot since he'd last seen her. When he first met her, she was a grouchy little snail in a gray turtleneck who only wanted to tend to her mushroom garden in peace. Now she was almost unrecognizable. She had grown out the tendrils on her head to the point where they looked like dreadlocks. She tied them back with a headband the same color as her shell, and instead of her gray turtleneck, she wore armor made from tree bark, the uniform of Yggdrasil's personal guard. She smiled awkwardly. "Hey Jack, how's it been going for ya? Haven't seen you in a while." "It's been busy. Looks like you've been up to a lot too." Scylla answered for her. "I've been coaching Snotter here for her guardian training. She's training to become one of Yggdrasil's personal guardians." Snotter nodded. "Been real busy. I'm supposed to have a week off for the Winter Solstice, but I just can't seem to sit down." Jack Thunder smiled. "Tell me about it. When San here was training me to wield Stormbringer, I couldn't wait to defeat my first Wendigo. I think I gave him a heart attack, actually." Jack Thunder chuckled uneasily. Snotter jumped. "That's actually San? The air champion?" San nodded. "Yes. I trained him to use Stormbringer just as Scylla is teaching you." "It's kind of a long story," Jack Thunder explained. Scylla smiled. "Well, you don't have to tell it all right now. It's getting late. Yggdrasil's grove is not far from here. If I take you there, I'm sure she would be more than happy to have you stay." The wind might have been as cold as the Razor Frost Range itself, but the 7 of them hardly felt it through the warmth of their conversation. They bantered back and forth all the way there, catching up on what had happened since they'd last seen each other. Snotter had moved into Yggdrasil's grove not long after she'd sold her former boulder home. The last time she saw it, she explained, the new owner had converted her mushroom garden into a place to put his shed. "Really? I'm so sorry." Snotter brushed the storm gremlin off. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter to me nearly as much now. Sad as I was to see it go, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. If I hadn't sold my house, I would have never met Scylla, and I'd probably still be rotting away in that place." Jack Thunder swore he could still hear a hint of sadness in her voice. "Oh look, here we are." The forest in front of them was decked out in lights of icy blue and snowy white. They flashed and pulsed softly as Jack Thunder surveyed his surroundings. To an outsider, it would have simply looked like another, most unusual part of the forest. Looking closer, however, one could see lights coming from windows carved out of the bloated trunks of the trees that surrounded them. The residents of this village had no need for buildings of stone or wood. Their homes were carved out of the trees themselves, and the heroes were standing on one of the village's many uneven, unpaved paths. Scylla motioned for them to follow her with her head. Jack Thunder glanced into the windows as he passed them by. He saw all kinds of scenes. 2 wood sprites sharing a meal together, dryads curled around a book by the fire, even a wild party of all kinds of fairies in one of the bigger tree houses. He marveled at how they all stayed warm despite the bitter cold outside. Maybe that was just one of Anima's secrets. "All right, we're here." Jack Thunder looked up. They were at the base of Ygdrassil. The ancient dryad's tree branches bore lights of all colors, and in front of them was an opening leading into her trunk. "Come on, I know she'll let you stay when I tell her you're here," Snotter encouraged the team inside. None of them saw the dryad with the green apples on his branches peering at them from behind one of the trees. His eyes glowed white as he stared. Chapter 3. It's Cold Outside. The interior of Yggdrasil's trunk was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the cold and dark just outside. The heartwood glowed a soft, warm yellow above their heads, its form suspended in the air by branches lacing through the air from the wooden walls that formed the structure of the trunk. The anima fragments pulsed in time with its heartbeat. Just below on the ground was a small raised platform that looked like a tree stump. More branches snaked around its base and up past the top, forming a makeshift railing. Snotter clambered up onto the platform and shouted for Ygdrassil. "I've come back, and we have company." "Oh, we do?" A booming, ethereal voice reverberated through the room. Jack Thunder instinctively clasped Stormbringer to his chest. It wasn't that he was afraid of Ygdrassil. He knew he had nothing to fear from the heart of the forest. But her voice carried an incredible power, one that could make even the fiercest of beasts cower before her. He cleared his throat. Yeah, just dropping in for the Winter Solstice." He hesitated to tell her the truth. "Actually, we have a more serious matter to attend to," Frosty interrupted. "These 3, she motioned to Jack Thunder, Buckthorn, and Shadowpaws, sensed a powerful source of earth magic in this very grove. Might you know anything about this?" "Ah, I see. I sensed the presence of the Fragments of Anima when you came in, and I believe that is San with you?" "It is me," San uttered tersely. "We faced off against a Wendigo calling itself Nemesis last autumn. Have you sensed any Wendigos around here lately?" "No, nothing of the sort. Even if there were, my heartwood would ward them off." "Don't worry so much about it. The heartwood protects this entire grove from harm," Snotter finished for Yggdrasil. "Say, while you're here, why don't you stay a few days? We could really use some help with the Winter Solstice preparations." Frosty was about to protest, but she kept her mouth shut. She really was in no position to argue. This might mean the difference between getting to Terra and not. "Don't even worry about finding a place to stay. Yggdrasil would be more than happy to let you stay. Isn't that right?" "Absolutely, Snotter." The crew could hear a smile in her voice. "It would be no trouble at all." Everyone was fast asleep, snug in the leaf hammocks hanging from Yggdrasil's branches. Razor had decided to sleep with Jack Thunder, laying down on his chest. They were surprisingly warm for being outside in the dead of winter. Even Buckthorn had no trouble falling asleep once she was settled. But there were 2 people who couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard they tried. Frosty sat on a high branch, looking out into the night sky. She turned when she heard the flapping of wings. San perched on the branch next to her. "You can't sleep either?" he asked her. She shook her head. "No, I've tried. I just can't stop thinking about that Wendigo Nemesis." San's face shifted to an expression of recognition. He was worried about Nemesis too. He had met many Wendigos of Nemesis's sort back during the war. Intelligent, insatiable monsters with a single-minded dedication to their mission, wily enough to fool even the most experienced Wendigo hunters, just like Nemesis had fooled Strombolio back at the Dark Carnival. He shuddered at the thought. If even Strombolio couldn't sense the presence of a Wendigo right in front of him, who was to say that he would be able to spot it? Who was to say that it couldn't get past the Heartwood somehow? He sighed and rubbed his temples. Worrying about these things was doing no good, especially when he could be asleep. How was he going to function tomorrow if he stayed up all night fretting about things he couldn't control? You're worried too? San jumped slightly, jerking out of his thoughts. Oh, I guess so. He smiled somewhat awkwardly. It's probably nothing. I mean, Jack didn't sense anything weird when we went through the town, did he? Not that he told me. I didn't see anything either. Just a bunch of trees decorated in lights. Yep, they sure went all out on the lights this year, didn't they? Frosty couldn't disagree. The lights were even brighter from up so high. She wondered if there were more lights down there than there were stars in all of the night skies of Alterus. Frosty smiled. This had to be the only time of year that the ground shone brighter than the sky. The peace didn't last. The world darkened before Frosty's eyes. Cold dread washed over her as the warmth from the Heartwood faded and the bright lights on the ground dulled and faded to gray. She thought she could hear faint screams around her as she felt a violent tug on her life force, threatening to tear it from her body. What was happening? All of a sudden, a pair of blazing red eyes flashed before hers. She screamed and jumped back, nearly falling off the branch. As soon as they came, they disappeared in a flash. So did the shadow over the land and the eerie wails in the air. Only a few seconds later, the world had been restored to its original state. A sea of white and blue lights danced across the ground below. The only sound that could be heard was the occasional howling breeze of the winter wind. She struggled to catch her breath. San, did you see that? San looked pale. Yes, I did. He had experienced this very sensation many times in the war. It was the exact feeling he got when an extraordinarily powerful Wendigo was nearby. He was overcome with anxiety. There was no question. There was a Wendigo in this very grove. But where? It certainly wasn't showing itself to anyone except them. Dang Wendigos, San thought, trying to scare us. Well, they're not going to frighten us away. They're the ones that should be afraid. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on the lookout for any suspicious behavior. And if I see either hide or hair of any Wendigo, well, let's just say they'll regret having ever come here. San snorted, puffing his chest out defiantly. He would not be intimidated by the likes of Nemesis or any of its magic-sucking lackeys. Chapter 4 Solstice Vacation. The winter sun, hanging low in the sky and shrouded in misty red, teased Jack Thunder, Buckthorn, and Shadowpaws awake. They shivered as they wrestled their way out of the leaves that held them. The sharp winter air was such a shock to wake up to after spending the night wrapped in warm blankets. Fortunate, then, that Yggdrasil's trunk stayed warm all year round. Buckthorn sighed in relief. At least in here it's not so bad. She wasn't sure how long she could take this. It never got this cold back in the Great Barrier Kingdom, not even during the holidays. Even more fortunate, after the team had gotten up and set off for the day, it had warmed up a bit. It still wasn't as warm as the Turquoise Archipelago, but at least it was more tolerable than it was that morning. Still, a thin frost coated the ground, crunching beneath her feet. I wonder how they can stand it, she thought. Most of the grove's residents were dryads, with a few wood sprites and talking animals scattered here and there. Dryads, the half-tree fairies who lived in the Emerald Woodland, usually hibernated through the winter, or so Buckthorn heard. These dryads were as active as everyone else, though their usually thick leafy hair was now wispy and snowy white to match the season. The horn-like branches growing from their heads were completely bare. All of a sudden, Buckthorn heard a commotion. A dryad much smaller than the others came bursting in through the crowds. "Has anyone seen Sour Apple?" Through the commotion, Buckthorn thought she recognized that dryad. Wasn't he at the party back in the Turquoise Archipelago? She remembered that there were 2 dryads at the party the day she and Jack Thunder liberated the islands from the Wendigos. And the name Sour Apple... Suddenly it hit her. Sweet Apple. He was at the party with Sour Apple. They had a competition between them to see how many apples each of them could sell. She almost didn't recognize him without the bright red apples hanging from his head branches. It was only by his eyes that she recognized him. They were a soft pastel red, much like the apples he bore on his branches during the cherry sun. Buckthorn pushed her way through the crowds and approached him. "Hey, what's up? What happened to Sour Apple?" Sweet Apple turned his glance to the reef siren. "Buckthorn? What are you doing out here? Aren't you supposed to be in the Great Barrier Kingdom?" So he recognized her. "Haven't you heard? It was me and Jack who beat the Wendigos and brought peace to the Turquoise Islands." He jumped back. "That was you?" Buckthorn sighed and rolled her eyes. Was this dryad dense? She knew trees were slow, but Sweet Apple took it to a whole new level. "I'm sorry, I'm just kinda all over the place right now. Me and Sour Apple had come down here to see if we could help with the solstice preparations, but then he suddenly went missing. It's not like him to just disappear like this." Sour Apple. He was the one selling apples with you, right? He nodded. "Yeah, he's a bit taller and thinner than me and has green eyes. Have you seen him?" She shook her head. "I'll keep an eye out for him." He thanked her as she left to regroup with the rest of the team. She relayed to them what she'd heard. "Sour Apple's missing? Wasn't he one of the dryads at the party?" Jack Thunder asked. Buckthorn had told him about it, but he hadn't seen them since he'd been in the hospital after the battle on the central island. "I saw him there too," San confirmed for her. "I don't really know them well, but it does seem suspicious that the tall one would suddenly vanish. That seems to be more in Sweet Apple's league," he chuckled to himself. "I don't know," Buckthorn replied. She hoped that Sour Apple had just gotten separated from Sweet Apple while they were in the grove, but with all that happened lately, she feared something darker. Jack Thunder's thoughts were interrupted by someone calling out to the crowd. "Hey everyone, the Elder Goat's in town!" All of a sudden, he was swept up in a tide of earth fairies as they made their way towards a far corner of the grove. Jack Thunder had met the Elder Goat many times as he was growing up. It was a beloved tradition in Alterus for fairies and magical beasts of all stripes to give their wishes to the Elder Goat. On solstice night, he would take all their wishes up to the pool of solstice wishes in the far north, where they would be granted. Of course, it wasn't wise to grant every single wish. The Elder Goat had a system for determining which wishes would be granted, and those whose wishes were rejected would receive little gifts and candy instead. Jack Thunder cringed. He wondered if the Elder Goat still remembered the incident from when he was 5. The Storm Gremlin Widget had somehow managed to stow himself away in the Elder Goat's sack of wishes. Neither Frosty nor the Elder Goat himself ever figured out how he'd managed to slip in unnoticed. It was only when he dumped the entire sack of wishes into the pool, granting every single one, that the Elder Goat found him out. It took him and his fellow Yule goats quite a while to clean that mess up. And you'll never believe this. One year, Jackie hid in the elder goat's sack and made it all the way to Yule City without anyone knowing. It was only when he spilled all the wishes into the pool that we found out where he was. Frosty was laughing about the incident with San. Jack Thunder cringed even harder. She sure remembers. This did not lift his spirits at all. Eventually they made their way up to the stump the elder goat sat on. He was quite the imposing figure, taking the form of a massive black goat man with enormous dragon wings and cloaked in a bright purple winter coat. If Jack Thunder didn't know better, he could have mistaken him for some sort of demon. Shadowpaws was first. He stared intently into the crystal adorning the elder goat's staff. What did he wish for? He whispered it into the crystal. I wish that I weren't such a scaredy cat. He finally made his wish. The crystal briefly flashed white before fading back to its cyan blue. A small glass orb floated in the air before making its way into the elder goat's sack. Shadowpaw's wish was received. Buckthorn was next. She wished for a warm coat for the winter time, to the surprise of absolutely no one. Jack Thunder wondered where he could get her a coat in the grove, hopefully before they ran into Nemesis again. Then, Razor went up to the elder goat. No one knew what he wished for, since he couldn't speak. Even so, the crystal in the elder goat's staff received the wish all the same. Now it was his turn. He took a deep breath and spoke. I wish that we could find out where Terra is before Nemesis gets to it. At the mention of the Earth Fragment, the elder goat's eyes flashed with recognition. The Earth Fragment? He looked up and spotted San beside the two fairies whose wishes he had just received. You're... He turned his gaze back down to the storm gremlin. Wait a minute. Aren't you that little widget who slipped into my sack that one time? What are you doing with San? Jack Thunder sighed. Yes, that was me. Anyways, that's not important right now. I sensed Terra somewhere in this grove, and we need to get it before... Frosty cut him off. Jackie, not so loud! Don't freak out everyone here! The elder goat cocked his head. Wait, what's going on here? Frosty leaned in, whispering into his ear. The heart of darkness is returning, and we need the anima fragments to banish it. We've found 3 so far, but it's not enough. There's this Wendigo calling itself Nemesis that's been trying to get to them before we can. What Jackie was saying is that we need to find Terra before Nemesis finds it. I didn't want him causing a panic, so I cut him off. The elder goat nodded slowly, his face a bit paler than before. I understand. I'll see what I can do. Jack Thunder, Buckthorn, and Shadowpaws all thanked the elder goat before they made their way back to town. The elder goat couldn't help but watch them intently as they left. He glanced back into his bag, looking at Jack Thunder's wish. He would grant it no matter what. Interlude 1. The Legend of Terra. Adamant Ironjaw swallowed hard. Had he done something wrong? Ygdrassil had summoned him into her inner sanctum. She hadn't told him why, though. He didn't think he did anything wrong. He did everything he could to protect the ancient dryad and her grove. But since the war started, it had become more and more difficult to do so. Even so, the grove was one of the few sanctuaries the people of Altars had from the Wendigos. It would not be so, he knew, had it not been for the efforts of Yggdrasil's guard and the power of the Heartwood, the heart of Yggdrasil herself and a powerful Wendigo ward to boot. So why was she summoning him? He stepped inside the tree trunk. Ah, I see you've arrived. I've been waiting for you. Adamant kneeled. I apologize for my lateness. I was caught up with an important task before I came here. I can imagine. There have been so many unfortunate beings coming into this grove lately. So many who have had their homes destroyed. They come here for protection. I understand if you are disappointed in me. I have been doing my best, but me and the other guards have been struggling. The Wendigos, they won't stop circling the skies. They dare not come into the grove, but they are just fine with attacking travelers who are trying to reach it. We've fended most of them off, but some... He paused. Some were not so lucky. I am not disappointed at all. In fact, Ygdrassil began, I have heard stories within the grove about a team of adventurers who have crafted powerful magical artifacts. Artifacts infused with the powers of Anima itself. Just this morning, I saw one of them in the grove. A Tengu mage carrying a staff shaped like a trident. He called it Stormbringer. Adamant raised his head. Was this really happening? Ygdrassil was sending him on a mission? So I present you with this. Twisting branches snaked down from above, carrying the metal head of one of the broad axes he and the other guardians wielded. The branches twisted, forming a long handle before crawling over the head of the axe and snaking across it like the roots of a tree. Raw power surged through them, and when it stopped, the axe glowed with a deep forest green light. This is Terra. I have forged it from my own branches in the earth magic from this very grove. It will prove useful to you on your quest. Please handle it carefully, it is very powerful. The troll couldn't believe his eyes. This was an axe forged from the very power of earth itself. He stood up and took Terra in his hands. Thank you, my liege. Is there anything I need to do before I leave? He was still a little uncomfortable with the idea of leaving the grove behind, even if it was for a good cause. Do not worry. My Heartwood protects this grove from harm. The others have been informed of your absence, and you may start on your journey as soon as you are ready. Good luck to you, General Ironjaw. Adamant was ready to leave right then and there. He quietly dismissed himself from the inner sanctum and left to go find the Tengu. This wasn't a journey he would make alone, after all. Chapter 5. Rocking Around the Ygdrassil. We didn't see you there, Snotter. What did you wish for? Snotter looked up from her cocoa directly at Jack Thunder. I wish to be as strong as Adamant Ironjaw himself. She flexed her right arm. He, Buckthorn, and Shadowpaw smiled. Even Razor flared his wings out to show his support. Shadowpaw spoke up. At least you're already strong. Me? I can't even face a little mouse without running for cover. That's why I wish to be braver. You think that's bad? Buckthorn chimed in. At least you two do better in this cold than I do. I wished for a coat. That's all I really want. To get through this winter without coming down with something. And Jack here nearly caused a panic in the square. What? Snotter nearly spat out her cocoa. What did you do? I was trying to explain our situation to the Elder Goat, and I guess I wasn't as quiet as I should have been. I'm sorry. Snotter sighed. It's all right, not like I blame you. I was actually looking for Terra myself. You were? You're not the only one who's seen the signs. The Wendigos have gotten braver as of late. They still won't dare come into the grove, but I've seen them swarming around the outside at night when no one else is out. I'm starting to think they have something to do with Sour Apple's disappearance, too. You know about Sour Apple? Buckthorn nearly yelled. Snotter had to resist rolling her eyes. How could anyone not know at this point? Poor Sweet Apple's been running around in a tizzy ever since it happened. Everyone in town's been looking for him, but so far we've found nothing. If those Wendigos got into the grove... She trailed off. She took a deep breath and finished. That's why I want to find Terra. If there is a Wendigo here, I want to banish it myself. I want to prove to Skilla that I can do this on my own. I've come so far. I just need to prove I'm ready. Jack Thunder remembered how he felt when he was training under San. He was so desperate to banish a Wendigo on his own. San didn't think he could do it. He was so mad at him he snatched Stormbringer right out of the Tengu's hand. So he could understand Snotter's point of view all too well. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll all find it together. Isn't that right?" The other two couldn't agree more. The next few days were a blur of celebration. Shadowpaws nearly forgot that he was on a mission. True, neither he nor the others had seen head nor tail of Sour Apple, but in the midst of a barrage of solstice decorating, dancing, and feasting, it was easy to forget that anything was off at all. Whatever threat was out there, the Heartwood was keeping it firmly under wraps. With all the excitement going on, they shouldn't have been the least bit surprised to find a familiar caravan of wooden trailers parked just on the outskirts of the grove. Within minutes, a flurry of Harlequin gremlins joined the wood sprites and the dryads in the festivities. Shadowpaws wasn't surprised. As dark elementals, Harlequin gremlin magic, like Nekomata magic, was the most powerful on the longest night of the year. That was why the Circus of Shadows came to visit in the fall and the winter. And right now, it seemed as though Strombolio and his crew decided to make a pit stop right at Yggdrasil's grove. Despite everything, though, they hadn't seen Strombolio either. Shadowpaws had passed by their trailers many times as he was making his rounds. Nothing. He swallowed hard, remembering how choked up Strombolio was when he granted his blessing for the Nekomata to join the crew. He knew his boss was in a bad place. Did he decide to take a break from performing? A dark thought struck his mind. Or did he... The Nekomata shook his head. No, that wasn't possible. If Strombolio had done something like that, the Circus of Shadows wouldn't be here. Strombolio must be taking a break from performing. Yes, that's it. He took a break to get himself straightened out. It was just stress. Once he was rested up, he would feel better. Maybe he would stop drinking so much cider. Zan's little talk must have really gotten to him, Shadowpaws thought to himself. He made his way back into town. It was close to evening. Most had gone home, tucked safe into their warm tree houses. A light snow had begun to fall. Only the faint whisper of wind around the trees and the crackling of magical fireplaces within could be heard. Staring at the lights atop the tree branches, Shadowpaws couldn't help but think of something he'd heard about Winter Solstice traditions back on Earth. One of the other Nekomata that worked at the Circus of Shadows, Sabrina Gray, had once claimed that she had seen the other side of the Earth portals before they closed. She told stories of a reindeer with a glowing red nose and a story about 3 ghosts coming to haunt a human who had given up on the Winter Solstice. Sabrina also lied a lot. It all sounded pretty unbelievable to Shadowpaws. A sudden rustling noise drew his attention to some bushes hiding in the gloom between the trees. At first, the Nekomata thought that it was a squirrel or something, but looking closer, he thought he saw a very familiar face. A familiar face with an even more familiar pair of copper-red eyes. His heart leapt into his throat. Is he really? As Shadowpaws inched closer, the face became clearer. It was the face of a Harlequin gremlin for sure. But this Harlequin gremlin looked much older than the others. His jumpsuit was black and purple, the same as the tents of the Circus of Shadows. But what tipped the Nekomata off was the notch in the Harlequin gremlin's right antenna. There was no mistaking who this was. Strombolio? You've been here all this time? Chapter 6. A Wonderful, Awful Idea. Shadowpaws couldn't even yelp. Strombolio pulled him into the bushes so fast that he didn't have time. Not so loud! They can hear you! Who can hear us? Shadowpaws asked. The Wendigos! They're in this here grove right now! Wendigos? Where have you been seeing Wendigos? Shadowpaws hissed, now frantic. Not just me. San and Frosty too. San told me about how they saw something the first night Ygdrassil put them up. I knew right then and there that those demons had followed them here. I brought the circus up here to see how I could help. So that's where Strombolio had been all this time. But what about the Heartwood? Strombolio's expression shifted to one of solemnity. You heard of Sour Apple? Supposedly went missing around here? Shadowpaws nodded. There was no way he could have not known. Poor Sweet Apple was worried sick. Well, I found him. He's not well. I tried to get him into my trailer so I could give him some medicine, but he ran away before I could snag him. He's still somewhere in this grove. You still got Lethal Joke with you? It's in Yggdrasil's chamber, Shadowpaw stammered. Strombolio sighed in relief. Okay, so it's safe. It's getting late, so I want you and the others to bring the fragments with you the next time you go out. I have a feeling you're gonna need them. I will. Thank you, sir. I'll go back to my trailer and see what I can do to help. Good luck, Shadowpaws. Shadowpaws raced back towards Ygdrassil. He had to tell Jack Thunder. It was the Grove's only hope. Shadowpaws bolted inside Yggdrasil's trunk and came to a rough stop, panting. Hey! What's up, Shadowpaws? You look like you've been running from the ghost of Solstice yet to come, Jack Thunder joked. Shadowpaws caught his breath. I know what happened to Sour Apple. At the mention of Sour Apple, Jack Thunder, Buckthorn, and Snotter stopped what they were doing and turned to face Shadowpaws. Even Frosty and San halted. What happened? Did you see him? Snotter almost shouted. Shadowpaws relayed to them what Strombolio had told him. The Wendigos broke into the grove? Snotter couldn't believe what she was hearing. That's what Strombolio thinks. Sour Apple was probably how they got in, Shadowpaws confirmed. Now that you mention it, Frosty added, San and I saw something strange the first night we came here. It was almost like a Wendigo tried to attack us but couldn't. We kind of assumed that the Heartwood would be enough to fend them off. Shadowpaws nodded. Strombolio told me. He wants all of us to take the Fragments of Anima with us when we go out tomorrow morning. He says we'll need them. Jack Thunder nodded. From the sound of it, they would definitely need the fragments to rescue Sour Apple. But they needed a plan, too. The room was silent as they all thought about it. Shadowpaws, where did Strombolio last see Sour Apple? Buckthorn broke the silence. He's wandering around the grove somewhere. Strombolio tried to grab him, but he got away. Buckthorn remembered how the sea stone pulsed when it sensed a Wendigo's presence. Our fragments should lead us right to him. That's right, Buckthorn, you're already learning so much. San nodded approvingly. But how will we catch him? A good question. The dryad wouldn't be easy to catch. Whatever Wendigo possessed him was smart enough to stay out of sight and far away from anyone that could break its spell over the dryad. Just their luck, the fragments would tip them off before they could even get close to Sour Apple. Jack Thunder remembered. Music. Music weakened Wendigos. If Buckthorn were to start singing around Sour Apple, it would stun him long enough for the others to get the jump on him. I think I've got it. Buckthorn, when we see him, I want you to sing your song. Then, while he's stunned, me, Shadowpaws, and Snotter will get the jump on him and get this Wendigo out of his body. Buckthorn nodded. Sounds like a plan. It does indeed. But I think we'd all better be getting to bed. You all will need your rest, Frosty reminded them. With that, they all went their separate ways to their bedchambers. They had a big day tomorrow, and none of them could afford to miss it. Jack Thunder and Razor woke up early the next morning. They had no time for festivities. Both of them knew that beyond the happy facade of the grove, something dark and menacing lurked. And today, they and their friends were going to find it. The 5 of them hastily made their way into town. As they wove their way in and out of the foliage, neither Stormbringer nor the Sea Stone nor Lethal Joke showed any changes in their auras. Jack Thunder wiped the sweat from his brow. This was going to be harder than he thought. "Shadowpaws, where were you when Strombolio found you?" he asked his companion. "Pretty far from here. I was near the Circus of Shadows caravan." Sour Apple might be there. He probably couldn't stand to be around the Heartwood right now, not with the Wendigo in his body. As the team ventured farther from the warmth and safety of the grove, past the line of trailers and into the deep woods, the anima fragments began to glow faintly. The air became sterile and frigid, and the land gradually lost its color, becoming more depleted with each step. Jack Thunder's hands tightened around his staff. Everything inside of him was primed for battle. Turning to the other three, he could see they were just as tense. Even Buckthorn seemed impervious to the cold as she followed close behind. Shadowpaw's ears wouldn't stop twitching. He listened for any signs of the dryad. Snotter was at the back, watching for anything that might spring on them from the dark. Finally, they reached a clearing. It was about midday, but one could mistake it for the middle of the night. The world had gone completely silent. Not even the wind or the crunch of snow beneath their feet could be heard. Holding the frantically pulsing Stormbringer aloft, Jack Thunder scanned the area to see if he could spot Sour Apple in the darkness. "Sweet Apple," a scratchy voice pierced the silence. Jack Thunder frantically glanced around. He couldn't see anything. "You, just leaving me with all the work. What kind of brother are you?" That voice. That was the voice of a person filled with nothing but anger and resentment. It sent a shiver down the storm gremlin's spine. He stepped out into the clearing, aiming Stormbringer's blade straight forward in preparation for an attack. Through the gloom, a scene took shape. One of those wooden trailers, much like the ones in the circus caravan, sat on the edge of the clearing. Beside it were many barrels full of apples. Jack Thunder wouldn't have been able to see any of this had it not been for the small lamp hanging from the side of the trailer, barely illuminating the scene. And making his way around the trailer was the dryad they had all been looking for. He was grabbing and picking at his head branches, not realizing there weren't any more apples on them. His leafy hair was unkempt and falling out, and he had dark circles under his Granny Smith-colored eyes, which now faintly glowed red. Worst of all, though, was his expression, twisted into one of complete bitterness. He had been here, working himself to the bone for days on end. He didn't even notice when Jack Thunder took a step forward. As he got closer, Jack Thunder noticed that Sour Apple's mouth was leaking black fluid. The same fluid he had seen leaking from Terry Paradise's mouth when he was infected. It wasn't until he was right up next to Sour Apple that the dryad noticed his presence. He growled, turning to the Storm Gremlin to scream at him. But when he saw Stormbringer in Jack Thunder's hand, he stopped dead in his tracks. Jack Thunder nearly bolted right then and there, but after a few moments, Sour Apple still didn't move. He tried reasoning with him. "Come on, you don't need to do this anymore. Your brother's worried about you." Sour Apple blinked. His eyes were locked on Stormbringer. Buckthorn, Shadowpaws, and Snotter stepped out into the clearing. Their anima fragments glowed all the same. At the sight of the four kids, Sour Apple staggered back. You need to," he struggled to get out. "I need to what?" Jack Thunder asked. A pair of smoldering eyes appeared from Sour Apple's shadow. Jack Thunder watched in horror as the shadow twisted upon itself, morphing into a grotesque new form. When it stopped, it emerged from the ground as a twisted parody of Sour Apple, one with his shape, but a form encased in inky black with sulfur yellow eyes, one that was as tall as the trees surrounding them. It let out a bellowing, roaring laugh. Run. Chapter 7. The Abominable Wendigo of the North. Now, Buckthorn, use your song! The sea stone resonated with Buckthorn's voice as she began to sing. The Wendigo tried to slam its arm down on her, but missed, carving a deep gash into the ground. Activated by the song, the sea stone summoned a swirling tempest. Freezing rain beat down on the clearing, encasing the Wendigo in ice. Snarling, it broke free. Its eyes glowed even brighter than before as 3 twisted, black, tree-like structures burst from the ground. No matter how many times the team struck the Wendigo with their attacks, it didn't slow down. In fact, it seemed to be growing stronger with every blow. Shadowpaws misfired, launching one of Lethal Joke's grenades at one of the tree structures. It burst upon impact, shriveling the tree somewhat. The Wendigo seemed to shrivel up too. It shrieked and staggered back. So the trees were the source of its power. Shadowpaws fired another grenade. Sure enough, it damaged the tree again, and the Wendigo shrunk even more. 2 more tree structures burst from the ground, their creator screeching in anger. Uh-oh, looks like I'm gonna have to do this fast. He danced precariously around the battlefield, blasting the trees one at a time. Jack Thunder noticed what Shadowpaws was doing and turned his attention to the tree structures. Razor did the same, closely trailing behind Shadowpaws. Buckthorn continued to sing, slowing the Wendigo's movements. Still, every time the team managed to take down one tree, 2 more would sprout in their place. Snotter skidded to a stop in the middle of the clearing. What were they going to do? How are they going to win this? All of a sudden, a thought struck her mind. A little bit of fire might do the trick. She sped to Sour Apple's trailer, jumping and grabbing the lantern that hung from the side. It was still lit. Good. I just hope it works. She threw the lantern at the base of one of the trees. It broke open on impact, exposing the inner flame to the structure. A few seconds later, the tree was completely engulfed in flames. The Wendigo wilted like leaves in the hot sun as it burned, shriveling and curling up, never to sprout again. It worked! Guys, I figured it out. Fire keeps them from sprouting again, Snotter shouted. So that's how it went. While Buckthorn sang her song, Shadowpaws launched his grenades at the trees, which Jack Thunder and Razor would zap with lightning as soon as they hit. The grenades exploded, setting the structures alight one by one. Somehow they stayed lit despite the pouring sleet the sea stone had summoned. Guess that Wendigo substance is so foul, it burns even when it shouldn't, Snotter mused to herself as she continued to beat back the Wendigo's attacks. Eventually, when all the trees were alight, the Wendigo shriveled and withered to just Sour Apple's height. It growled as its form twisted, morphing once again. When it stopped, an all-too-familiar fanged goat skull greeted the four's eyes. Nemesis! The Wendigo general growled. This always happens to me. I have my enemies in my grasp, then something comes along and steals the victory right from my claws. Cut the chatter, goat face. What were you doing to Sour Apple? Snotter snapped. Razor growled at the Wendigo general from his place on Jack Thunder's shoulder. Oh, this one? Nemesis gestured to the dryad. He was the one who let me in. His resentment towards his brother was all the fuel I needed to build my strength. I had to bide my time, but it was worth it. What? Sour Apple shouted. I didn't let you in. You infected me, just like the virus you are. Oh, hush, Nemesis scolded him. You have no place to talk here. If I recall, you're the one who said, This season's gotten to everyone's heads. It was you that couldn't be bothered to stop at the grove and let loose a little, even for your brother's sake. All you could think about was your work. And I have to thank you. If not for you, I would never have been able to get past the Heartwood. Sour Apple dropped his head in shame. Jack Thunder leapt in front of him. Hey, knock it off! Why don't you just leave him alone? Actually, I think I will. I have no use for this one anymore. With his anima, I can get past the Heartwood just fine. Once that's done with, there will be nothing standing between me and the fragment of earth. Nemesis turned to its former host. Really nice knowing you, Sour Apple, it taunted before disappearing in a puff of black smoke. When the light returned, it was close to evening. The sun hung low in the sky, dyeing the clearing a shade of golden yellow. Snotter spotted the broken lantern still laying on the ground. Oh, sorry about your lantern. It's all right. Sour Apple still stared at the ground glumly. Don't listen to that monster. It was just trying to get you riled, Jack Thunder told him. It could have happened to anyone, Buckthorn added as she tended to his wounds. The sea stone glowed a soft teal as she restored his anima with her healing magic. Even to a resounding crash echoed through the forest. Their hearts fell as they remembered. Nemesis, the grove. They had to get back to the grove. Jack Thunder turned to Sour Apple. You stay here. You'll be safer in these woods. We need to get back to Ygdrassil's grove. We'll come back for you later. The team dashed their way back through the woods. Sour Apple would be fine, at least for the time being. Right now, Ygdrassil and the grove were more important. They couldn't even see where they were going, but the fragments guided their way as they pulsed with increasing urgency. If Nemesis had gotten to the Heartwood, they didn't even want to finish that sentence. Interlude 2: Quaking Earth. Adamant drew the axe from his back. Terra glowed with a deep green light as the branches that formed its handles slithered around his arms like snakes. He stared deep into the ravine. Without warning, a sea of white eyes appeared and burst forth. The Wendigo wasn't done just yet. It dug its tendrils into the ground, planting itself as not to be cast into the fissure again. Grotesque, tree-like structures sprung up from the ground. Immediately, Adamant knew what these were. These constructs were something the Wendigos learned about by draining dryads. The tree people had special powers that caused trees to burst forth from the ground. These trees would serve to heal them and enhance their powers. That was what these constructs were doing, except they were born not from earth magic, but from the powers of Null. Fortunately for Adamant, Terra did just the same for him. His wounds healed themselves as he stood before the Wendigo. Faster than a hurricane, he swung it at the constructs, hacking them to pieces. The foul beast roared and shrieked, shrinking back as each one was destroyed. It was no use. For every construct destroyed, the Wendigo would generate 2 more. That's when he heard a shrill whistle right next to his ear. Altaria! The Kitsune launched herself at the Wendigo. She was much faster than Adamant, slashing through the false trees with Yuki, the flaming katana that she wielded. As soon as the fire fragment touched them, they burst into flames. The Wendigo shriveled up as the tree constructs burnt into ash. New ones did not grow in their place. Seeing his chance, Adamant swung Terra over his head. It hit the ground so hard that the earth quaked beneath them. It split in half where Terra landed, the crack rushing straight towards the Wendigo. Its tendrils snapped off as the ground opened wide beneath it. It shrieked as it fell, and the very land itself sealed shut around it, swallowing it whole. Adamant looked around. The Wendigo was gone, but the land was still ravaged, completely drained and bearing scars left and right. He flipped Terra around, placing the handle on the ground. It glowed a soft green, roots planting themselves in the ground. The glow spread up Adamant and Alteria's bodies, healing their wounds. It spread to the land itself, restoring it with its powerful healing magic. When the glow faded, the world that surrounded them had been restored. It was still roughened from the battle, but all signs of anima depletion had faded away. Shades of gray were replaced with the soft colors of evening. The stars twinkled in the sky above them once more. Adamant's gaze darted around, looking for any more Wendigos to fight. When it became apparent that there were none left, he turned to Alteria. "Thank you for saving me back there." She turned around, sheathing her sword. "Thought you could use some help. These things inherit any power they drain, and I already knew that dryad magic was weak against fire. It was a good thing you have that axe of yours with you." "Those things get stronger and smarter every time we fight them." Adamant shook his head. "The heart of darkness is growing desperate. You saw what happened to San. One of those monsters straight up tore his cheek open." He took a deep breath. "Anima knows what'll happen when the time comes to face the heart of darkness." Alteria wished she knew what to say. When she first met Adamant, he was so self-assured. The war had taken a heavy toll on him, as it did on all of them, just living from battle to battle, all the while struggling with cold, hunger, and pain. Even Alteria had to admit that it all had dampened her inner flame. She just hoped that what was left of their fighting spirits would last long enough so they could complete their mission. She sat next to him, taking a moment to watch the stars. It was then she realized there was no going back. If they gave up now, they would only assure their deaths. The whole world was relying on them. A lesser being would have crumbled under the pressure, but it made Alteria's spirit burn even brighter. She wouldn't give up, and knowing Adamant, neither would he. Chapter 8. A Band of Misfits. It was just as Jack Thunder feared. The entire grove had been drained dry. It had lost all its color, faded to a muted shadow of its former self. Almost all the lights on the trees' branches had died out. Those that remained had faded to a slate gray. Worst of all, neither him nor the others could feel the warmth from the heartwood anymore. Jack Thunder looked off in the distance. Ygdrassil had caught the same gray disease as the rest of the grove. He thought the heartwood would protect them, but even that had become a victim to Nemesis's evil. Strombolia was right to be worried. So were Frosty and San. "There you are! I've been looking all over for you!" Jack Thunder looked up to see Skilla running towards him. "Skilla! Thank Anima! I thought you had been drained too." "I thought the same of you. Did you find Sour Apple?" Skilla asked. Jack Thunder, Buckthorn, Shadowpaws, and Snotter nodded together. "Yep, we found him. He should be safe now. But that Wendigo he caught turned out to be Nemesis. And now, well..." They turned their gaze towards the lifeless grove. "You probably know the rest." The Forest Dragon spoke. "I thought you'd be out here. I need your help finding the Earth Fragment. You said you detected it near Ygdrassil before. Well, I found out that Ygdrassil has been keeping it this whole time, waiting to find her bravest warrior to bestow it on. But I don't know exactly where it is. With the other fragments, it'll be a lot easier to find." The 4 young heroes in the wyvern whelp climbed onto Skilla's back as she made haste towards Ygdrassil. There was no time to lose. A chill ran up Shadowpaw's spine. It spooked him that there were absolutely no lights inside any of the tree houses, despite it being Solstice Eve. It was like the grove had become a ghost town overnight. The hollow chill in the air didn't help matters. Somehow, the lack of wind made the air even colder. He was granted no relief when he stepped inside Yggdrasil's trunk either. He remembered how dark it was inside the circus tent at the Dark Carnival when Nemesis was in the room. It was the same way here. He couldn't even see the heartwood when he looked up. Fortunate, perhaps. He didn't want to see what Nemesis had done to it. Snotter? Don't worry, it's just us. Do you know where to find the earth fragment? Who wants to know? Shadowpaws was shocked at the sudden coldness in Yggdrasil's tone. It's important. The grove has fallen under a curse. We need the earth fragment to restore anima to the grove, Snotter replied calmly. Don't know why you care. I don't care anymore. Shadowpaw stepped back. Was Ygdrassil really giving up? But if I did, I'd tell you that Terra's beneath my roots. To your left is a staircase. Descend it, and you will arrive at a series of tunnels. It is somewhere in there you will find the earth fragment. Ygdrassil trailed off. She had spent so much energy trying to resist the Wendigo's influence that she barely had the strength to speak even those words. Even so, she helped them greatly. Snotter thanked her before the team descended the staircase one by one. At the last step was a narrow earthen tunnel, much like those of rabbits' dens, except these were much bigger. As soon as they took that last step, Stormbringer, the Sea Stone, and Lethal Joke lit up simultaneously. They each glowed that bright forest green Jack Thunder had seen before. Ygdrassil wasn't lying. Using the fragments as their guide, the team made their way through the network of tunnels. The journey was surprisingly quiet. Jack Thunder had expected that there would be Wendigos crawling over each other to get to him, but he hadn't seen a single one since he had arrived back at the grove. In some ways, that was a good thing. He didn't have to worry about being attacked in these tunnels, which were abysmally dark even without the oppressive influence the Wendigos exerted over them. But in others, it worried him even more. He couldn't help but feel that they were trying to lure him into a false sense of security. He could still feel the anima being sucked from his form, the sensation becoming stronger as he inched closer to his target. They were clearly here, so why weren't they attacking? Jack Thunder looked back towards the others. Shadowpaws looked the most scared out of all of them. Snotter and Buckthorn both bore looks of determination, the latter clutching the sea stone tightly to her chest. After far too long, the team spotted something up ahead. It was glowing the same shade of green as their fragments. They made their way into a small antechamber, each taking their place at the other's side so they could get a better look. Its form took shape. One end was long and twisted. It pointed in the air. The other was broad and heavy-looking, sitting on the ground. The green glow was coming from the edges of the broad object. No, blades. They were blades. The long end was a handle, formed from twisting branches with the leaves still attached. It fastened the head in place with even more twisted roots. Terra. They'd found Terra. Before they could make another move, though, an unfortunately too familiar voice spoke, one which possessed an ethereal evil in its every word. "Leave it alone. It's mine." Jack Thunder growled. Nemesis. The superior Wendigo made itself known, its glowing red eyes beaming down at the four. Without warning, its vicious claws lashed out, grabbing the axe. It tried to pick it up, but the glow coming from Terra grew brighter and brighter until it seared the foul beast's hands. It barked in pain and dropped the broad axe. "Ah, cursed artifact," it growled, shaking its hands to cool them. Its eyes narrowed. "You fairies and your insipid magic. I drained the heartwood, something no Wendigo has ever been able to do, and the fragments still repel me?" Nemesis paused and took a deep breath. "Well, I may not be able to carry the earth fragment myself, but I can at least keep it away from you." In its rage, Nemesis took a very unwise charge at the crew. As it smashed into the opposite wall, Snotter slipped behind its back and grabbed Terra. As soon as she picked it up, she could feel its raw power coursing through her veins. It truly was a marvel of creation. Nemesis picked itself up. Through the gloom, it spotted Jack Thunder, the leader of the bunch and the one who first dared to defy it. Without him, the team would lose hope and disband. It charged another attack. Snotter noticed the red glow from behind her and whipped around to face Nemesis. It was now or never. She swung the axe over her head and smashed the blade onto the ground. The world exploded into tremors. The sudden earthquake threw off Nemesis's aim, causing it to throw a bolt of null magic into the ceiling. The roof abruptly collapsed on top of Nemesis, trapping the Wendigo under a mountain of boulders. "Now's our chance! Run!" The team didn't have to be told twice. They made their way out of the tunnels, dashing back towards the stairs. The tunnels trembled so hard that the crew thought Snotter had caused a cave-in. As soon as they made their way up the stairs, they slid to an abrupt stop in the middle of Ygdrassil's chambers. "Okay, is everyone alright?" Snotter asked, Terra still clutched in her hand. Jack Thunder looked around. No one really seemed to be hurt, just really out of breath. "I think so." The chamber was eerily silent. Though the night sky shimmered outside, Jack Thunder took no peace in it. Not even Ygdrassil stirred. She must have fallen asleep. It was times like this when he wished Frosty were here to comfort him. He hadn't seen her since that morning. He felt his knees grow weak. Jack Thunder shook his head. No time for that now. Snotter had Terra now. They just needed to restore Anima to the grove. He made his way outside, the rest of the team close behind. Chapter 9. The Best Way to Spread Solstice Cheer. Deep within the tunnels of Yggdrasil's roots, a pile of boulders stirred. It collapsed to the ground with a bang as a slender, blackened figure crawled its way out of the top. "I'm not beaten yet," Nemesis thought as it popped out of the pile, clambering atop the rocks. It had to admit, that kid was tough. It never thought that someone that snail's age would be able to swing such a powerful and heavy relic like that. Nemesis looked around as its ethereal eyes adjusted to the dim. The tunnel hadn't collapsed. Good. Even if it had, Nemesis could slither between the rocks, but this way it was a lot easier to find its way out. As it made its way through the tunnels, it vowed not to let its anger get the best of it again. Its army was still out there, inside every single tree house and haunting every single fairy in the grove. All it had to worry about was the Winter Solstice spirit. For you see, the Winter Solstice spirit is the spirit of all the cheer and goodwill the people of Alterus share around this time of year. Not only does it lift the spirits and restore the anima of anyone who sees it in the sky, but it serves as a powerful ward against Wendigos, even stronger than the Heartwood. Nemesis made its way up the stairs and peered through the gap in Yggdrasil's trunk, towards the night sky. It's not there. Good. It wasn't quite time for the Winter Solstice spirit to appear. Not yet. But Nemesis knew it would take its place in the sky sooner or later. It just didn't know when. Nemesis disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. It would not fail this time. All of a sudden, the night sky darkened. It took Jack Thunder a moment to realize that those weren't clouds in the sky, but rather hundreds upon hundreds of Wendigos. Their sulfur yellow eyes dotted the otherwise lightless sky. Without warning, a bolt of black lightning struck the ground in front of him. When the dust cleared, he could see Nemesis floating in the air just above his head. Two burly-looking Wendigo guards flanked its sides. The Wendigo general said nothing. It just pointed straight at Jack Thunder. At its command, the two Wendigos at its side dove towards the team. The Storm Gremlin fought back with his own green lightning, to no avail. The team scattered, just barely managing to dodge the Wendigo guards before they crashed into the ground. The Wendigo storm became rougher. Even more black lightning bolts struck, throwing wood and earth into the air wherever they hit. More Wendigos dove, seemingly shrugging off the team's attacks with ease. At this point, all they could do was hope to survive. They had no chance of even launching another attack at this rate. Nemesis smirked, peering down at the five as they began to tire. This was what it was so afraid of? Its army could keep on like this all night. Without the Heartwood to protect them, it was only a matter of time before those kids could no longer move. Then, there would be nothing stopping it from grabbing the Fragments of Anima and draining the magic right out of them. All of a sudden, the clock struck 12. A resounding bong reverberated through the air as the Wendigo storm above broke apart. With ear-splitting screeches, many Wendigos plummeted straight to the ground. Nemesis looked all about. What was happening? A glance up at the sky gave it its answer. High in the sky was a bright star, bright enough to rival even the sun. Surrounding it was an aura of many colors, 6 to be exact. Red, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet cast their rays on the ground below, painting its many spectacular colors. This was the Winter Solstice spirit. As it cast its rays down on the grove, the color slowly came back. The Winter Solstice lights once again graced the tops of the trees in their icy blue and white hues. Fairies stirred and emerged from their homes. All over the grove, they could see the chaos happening at the foot of Ygdrassil. Above their heads, Wendigos careened through the air without rhyme or reason. But even through all of this, they could see above their heads a messenger of hope. Taking advantage of the temporary lull, Jack Thunder waved Stormbringer in the air. It flashed its trademark green before the northern winds kicked up, blowing the rest of the Wendigos out of the sky. Nemesis struggled to stay in the air as the gale turned icy cold. Shining crystals formed around its body, encasing it in ice as it crashed to the ground. Jack Thunder looked over to see Frosty and San fighting at his side. "Frosty! Mr. San, you made it!" Frosty barely had time to react as a Wendigo landed near her feet. It barely had a chance to get up before she blasted it with an ice beam, freezing it in place. San took to the skies, beating Wendigos back with his wings and using his claws to rend through their forms. Seeing the Solstice spirit in the sky, Buckthorn and Shadowpaws exchanged looks and nodded. They both ran from Ygdrassil down to the village, Razor following close behind. If they were going to save the Winter Solstice, they would need some help. Buckthorn clambered up onto a tall tree stump and shouted, "Everyone, I need your attention, please!" Every fairy in the village turned in her direction. Even the ones still in their homes craned their necks out the window so they could hear. She cleared her throat. "I know that things look very bad right now. The Wendigos have invaded and purged the Heartwood. My friends are still up there fighting the threat, but they need your help." She looked down at the crowd. Many faces held an expression of fear, but they were all listening intently. No one was panicking. Buckthorn remembered Jack Thunder happily singing solstice carols in the forest only a week ago. It reminded her of something she heard in a movie once. It went something like, "The best way to spread solstice cheer is singing loud for all to hear." She was sure she was butchering that quote, but singing was the right instinct now. She turned towards the crowds in the streets. "So I'll tell you what we're gonna do. I'm going to start singing, and you just follow along. It doesn't matter how small you are or how bad your voice is. Every single voice will help." Buckthorn closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She began her song. Helios, the pregnant horn, was a very silly beast. Meanwhile, Shadowpaws bolted and blitzed past the trees, Razor running after him. He had only one goal. He was going to find Strombolio. The Elder Harlequin Gremlin was sure to have seen the chaos going on. He would be able to help. He ran into Strombolio sooner than he thought. Literally. The two crashed to the ground, Shadowpaws laying on top of Strombolio. Shadowpaws? Shadowpaws dusted himself off as Razor skidded to a stop beside him. No time to explain. We need your help. Whoa, what's going on up there? Strombolio pointed to the storm center just above Ygdrassil. The others are up there. They're going at it with everything they've got, but we need the village's help. Buckthorn and I came down here to see if we could rouse the crowds into showing some solstice cheer. Razor nodded and chirped in confirmation. One less knowing would have considered Buckthorn and Shadowpaws' actions cowardly, but Strombolio knew better. Solstice cheer was just the thing needed to restore the grove. He had taught the Nekomata well. I was thinking the same thing myself. I was just about to start an uninvited parade. Uninvited parade? All of a sudden, Harlequin gremlins of all ages appeared from the shadows. They were hiding in corners, behind trees, in the bushes, everywhere. Strombolio turned towards them and beamed. That's right. When I start tapping, Alpha Team heads south and Beta Team heads north. You got it? All the Harlequin gremlins cheered. Alrighty then. Here we go. Strombolio got out 2 sticks and began tapping out a rhythm with them. The Harlequin gremlins began marching along to that rhythm. As Strombolio's tapping became faster and faster, the march turned to a stampede. Strombolio ran in front of them as they beelined straight towards Ygdrassil. Watch out for villagers while you're out there! Chapter 10. And to all a good night. Buckthorn felt the ground shake beneath her. Before she knew it, the entire square was awash in a Harlequin gremlin hurricane. They made circles around the villagers, singing the same carols she had been singing earlier. Despite their stampeding, they took extra care not to trample any of them. Children and adults alike cheered as they made their way through the town. They were not as careful with the fallen Wendigos. Many of the foul creatures had fallen in the streets, and before they could get up, the mob of marching gremlins trampled over and flattened them, reducing them to enormous black stains on the ground. They didn't get back up. Keep singing, Strombolio prodded. The uninvited parade made its way through town, splitting once they reached the center square just beneath Ygdrassil. Strombolio took his place next to Buckthorn, still tapping out the rhythm on his sticks. He looked over to her and winked. One party went north, the other south. Wherever they went, the Harlequin gremlins carried Buckthorn's song with them. They were unstoppable, leaping over barrels and bushes, traipsing over steep hills and into ravines, and even doing parkour off the tops of the tree houses. Even the littlest of them were surprisingly nimble, climbing places where they couldn't jump. As wild as they were, it was hard for the grove dwellers not to catch a smile. When the Circus of Shadows came to town, it was hard not to join in on the fun, no matter how crazy some of their antics were. Some of the fairies in the village even started marching with them. Snotter swung Terra at yet another Wendigo, slicing it in half. Both she and Jack Thunder noticed the Wendigo's attacks were slowing down. Looking back at Ygdrassil, they saw that she had restored some of her color. From the gap in her trunk, they could even see a faint golden light. The heartwood was healing itself. Jack Thunder and Snotter felt a renewed strength flow through them. Meanwhile, Nemesis suffered as if it were baking under the sun. The two fairies could see the superior Wendigo's form bubble and boil, struggling to hold on to its shape. The Wendigos around them fared little better. They were either reduced to inert puddles of goo, or crept their way towards the two slowly and laboriously, melting into the dirt. A gout of Wendigo substance gushed from Nemesis' mouth, threatening to splash onto Jack Thunder and Snotter. They stepped back, but the black gunk still made its way around their feet. Wow, I never realized how pathetic Wendigos really are, Snotter quipped, slinging Terra over her shoulder. She was right. Between the Winter Solstice spirit and the now restored Heartwood, Nemesis couldn't even stand up straight. How ironic that magic, The one thing that Wendigos fed off of was also the one thing that could defeat them. You can say that again, Snodder, Jack Thunder concurred. For all its bluster, it's nothing but a 3-decker sauerkraut and toadstool sandwich. Nemesis snarled and threw itself at Snodder. It didn't care that it had become weak and sick. It would make that snail pay for what she said. Except that didn't happen. Just seconds before impact, Strombolio's troop had arrived. Storming through past the 2 ferries and towards Ygdrassil, an entire army of Harlequin gremlins trampled Nemesis underfoot. They made their way around the ancient dryad, still singing their song. The gray spell over Ygdrassil lifted, and the light inside her trunk shone brighter than ever before. The heartwood had been fully restored. Nemesis was only able to lift its head before Snodder slammed Terra on the ground once more. The ground trembled anew, and a fissure split the earth where it hit. A fissure that made its way straight towards Nemesis. The Wendigo general fell into a pit and found itself stuck fast between its steep walls. Green vines slithered down and over the Wendigo general, netting it inside. It might as well have been mold clinging to the rocks at this point. Nemesis looked up from where it landed. It saw Jack Thunder and Snodder peering down into the hole. One by one, the other heroes took their place. First Buckthorn, then Shadowpaws, then Razor. They all stared down in contempt. Jack Thunder held his hand out to Snodder. "You ready?" She took his hand. "Ready." The 4 young heroes encircled the fissure and brandished their fragments towards Nemesis's crumpled form inside. "Back to the flip side with you and your hate." Stormbringer coursed with electricity, reverberating with a white aura. "You have no place in this land of dreams." The sea stone swirled with color, a soft rainbow emanating from its form. "We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours." Both Lethal Joke and Terra teemed with energy. Swirls of smoke slithered around the dark fragment, while Snodder could see leaves of magical energy falling from Terra like autumn leaves. "Now be gone!" Just like the last time, the glow from all the anima fragments together became excruciatingly bright. Rainbow beams emerged from each fragment, merging in the center. Only this time, the beam made a long arc across the night sky, splitting and hitting several points within the village. One of them recoiled back and fell into the fissure, hitting Nemesis head-on. Through the bright spectral beam, Snodder could see what looked like black ashes rising out of the pit. She faintly heard an angered roar through the din of the spell. One by one, each rainbow beam became speckled with black dots. Every single soldier in Nemesis's precious army was reduced to nothing but black ashes, rising upwards towards the highest point of the rainbow. Slowly, even the rainbow beams retracted into themselves, leaving only a swirling ball of energy hanging in midair. It lingered for only half a second before it launched itself directly towards the night sky. Every being in the grove watched as it disappeared into space. Just seconds before a distant explosion shook the world around her, Snodder swore she could hear a distant shout. It sounded something like, "I hate that storm gremlin!" Chapter 11. The Elder Goat Comes Tonight. Snodder glanced around. Despite their victory, the grove had not come out unscathed. Many of the tree houses' branches were broken and scattered around, and the paths between them bore deep scars. She looked down and noticed Terra glowing. She could already guess what it wanted to do. Flipping it around, she planted the head of the axe into the dirt. The green glow from Terra radiated through the earth and bathed the entire grove in earthy jade light. When the light faded, all signs of damage in the little village had been erased. It was as if the invasion had never happened. "Hey everyone, look!" Snodder turned her gaze to where Jack Thunder was pointing. She gasped in awe as soon as she saw it. The Winter Solstice spirit. The rainbow aura surrounding it had spread across the entire night sky. The individual colors had split from each other and were dancing across the atmosphere, like the northern lights times 10. All of a sudden, a winged figure swooped in front of it for a split second. Snotter knew who this was. "The Elder Goat! The Elder Goat's come to town!" Glittering snowflakes fell from the sky as the Elder Goat soared over the grove. Gift boxes of all shapes and sizes materialized as the snow touched the ground. The solstice lights all over the town changed from blue and white to red, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and purple. Even Yggdrasil's branches bore all the colors of Anima as the sparkles fell down on her. The Elder Goat circled around Ygdrassil and made his way down to the ground. He took a stand right in front of Jack Thunder. "Looks like I was able to grant you your wish after all." "Elder Goat, thank you so much!" Jack Thunder nearly jumped into the Yule Goat's arms. "Whoa, easy there, son. I wouldn't have missed your wish for nothing, not with the fate of Alterus at stake." He turned to the other 3 young heroes as they approached him. "And I do believe that I have some things for you, too." The Elder Goat reached behind his back and pulled out a teal and blue coat. Buckthorn eagerly took it. "Thank you so much! This will really help me with the cold out here." He turned to Shadowpaws. "As for your wish, I understand you wish you had more courage. I wasn't able to grant that wish, but I think that this will help." He apologized as he took out a set of boots. These were enchanted to grant their wearer super speed and agility. They were bright red and black, much like Jack Thunder's Razor poster back on Tempest Island. "Oh, thanks." Shadowpaws was a bit disappointed, but he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Finally, Snotter stepped forward. "How about me? Am I as strong as Adamant Ironjaw?" The Elder Goat smiled and winked at her. "I think you already know the answer to that question." He was right. She and her friends had just bested one of the Heart of Darkness's best generals, after all. There was no question she was ready. "And it seems you've more than proved yourself worthy of wielding Terra. Remember that going forward on your journey." Snotter bowed her head. "Thank you, Elder Goat. I will do my best." With a flap of his leathery wings, the Elder Goat took to the skies once more. As he disappeared beyond the horizon, Jack Thunder shouted after him, "And wish the Winter Orchestrator a happy Winter Solstice for me too." He could swear he heard the Elder Goat shout back, "Will do." The snow continued to fall around them despite the clear night sky, a sky that was now cascading with the northern lights times 10. Shadowpaws' gaze was naturally drawn to the source of all this color. Despite how bright it was, it didn't hurt his eyes when he looked straight at it. In fact, all pain faded from his body as he gazed at it. In its place grew a soft warmth spreading throughout his body. No creature in Alterus, no matter how foul-tempered or cold-hearted, could stare straight into the Winter Solstice spirit and not feel their hearts soften at least a little bit. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jack Thunder turned to the Nekomata. Shadowpaws nodded. He had seen the Winter Solstice spirit many times when he was on the road, but he never felt as content as he did now. Maybe it was because of the post-workout high from the battle, he wasn't sure. Not like it mattered now. One by one, he and his friends lifted their voices in song. The entire village soon joined in to their chorus. "You'd better not shout, you'd better not cry." Whoa, I've never seen a performance as big as that one. "Gotta hand it to you guys," Strombolio commented. "Y'all really know how to put on a good show." The entire town had erupted into celebration as soon as the chorus ended. The Winter Solstice was here, and the harrowing experience they had just been through wasn't enough to convince the Grove dwellers to take it easy. The Winter Solstice only came once a year, and they weren't going to waste it. Jack Thunder and company had taken a seat near Strombolio's caravan, far away from all the excitement. Strombolio sat down on the ground next to the campfire with them. "Hey, Mr. Strombolio, how come you're not celebrating?" Strombolio shrugged. "Been trying to stay away from the cider ever since San and I had that talk. Being in the town would just tempt me." Jack Thunder almost giggled. He knew how much those earth fairies loved their cider. "Well, that explains why you've lost so much weight," San interjected. The Harlequin gremlin chuckled. "Maybe it all ended up on you." Jack Thunder hadn't noticed it before, but the two elder champions were right. Strombolio still had a gut, but Jack Thunder could see that his jumpsuit fitted him more loosely than it did back in the nursery rhyme district. At the same time, San had seemed to fill out since the Storm Gremlin had first met him. While he wasn't fat, he was nowhere near the scary, skinny Tengu Jack Thunder had met back on Tempest Island that summer. Both of them seemed to be doing better. Shadowpaws noticed it too. He had seen Strombolio smile and laugh many times, but this had to be the first time the Elder Harlequin Gremlin actually seemed happy. Actually happy, without the help of cider. Strombolio and San continued to banter with each other. "Guess Nemesis doesn't really like the feeling of its heart growing 3 sizes. Too bad it's missing out on this amazing solstice cake," Strombolio laughed. "Your gut's gonna grow 3 sizes if you don't lay off the cake, Strombolio." San poked fun at the Harlequin Gremlin. "Really? Then maybe you should try some. You're the one who needs it." As Snotter listened to their laughter, she stole one last look at the Winter Solstice spirit. She was filled with contentment as she fell asleep next to the fire. She had a long road ahead, but for now she could rest. Snotter smiled. It had been a very merry winter solstice, even merrier than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 12. Fire in the Mountains. All the denizens of Alterus loved the winter solstice a whole lot, but the wicked Nemesis, who had just landed back in the flip side, very much did not. And why would it? It remembered how it felt just before it was banished. The combined anima from the Heartwood and the Winter Solstice spirit was too much for its corrupt countenance. But when that little snail insulted it, it didn't care about all that. It almost had her in its grasp when those clown gremlins mowed it down under their feet. Then it ended up in a pit, the fragments started glowing, and then... well, you know the rest. And yet... It watched the team celebrate through the window to Alterus it had created. The Air and Dark champions. They had both been through so much during the war. It would have guessed that they would never smile again after all they went through. But here they were, laughing and joking like they didn't have a care in the world. It felt an ache in its form, one that wasn't just from its exhaustion and sickness. There was something about the scene before it that it longed for. It could see that despite having few material possessions and little magical power on their own, these two friends were happy. At that moment, Nemesis wanted nothing more than what they had. What was this feeling? Was Nemesis growing soft? Did it seriously want to surrender its precious and hard-gotten anima to another? To give up all the power it had for a simple and pathetic life like the fairies before him now? What would happen if the Heart of Darkness were to hear of this? Besides, that was impossible. Nemesis was a Wendigo. Its nature was to consume magic, and it never would be happy as long as it didn't. Maybe that Winter Solstice spirit had gotten to its head more than it would have liked to admit. Nemesis reluctantly opened another viewing window. There were only 2 anima fragments left now, Yuki and Excalibur, fire and light. And it would have to find them fast. It was running out of time. It had already burned itself trying to grab Terra with the other fragments near. Those kids were becoming too powerful. At this rate, they would have all the fragments of anima before next summer. Then, Neither Nemesis nor any of the Heart of Darkness's other generals could hope to stop them. It couldn't find any signs of the 2 missing fragments on Pandora. Good. They weren't on this continent, at least. Its shoulders relaxed, if only slightly. Kind of strange that half of the fragments would land on the same continent, it thought. But it was in no position to question this. It scrolled the window westward. Tempest Island was still moving in that direction. After some scrolling, it landed on the continent across the Lapis Ocean from Pandora, a continent known as Kirkea. Moving inward slightly, it sensed a powerful source of fire magic. Nemesis adjusted its view to the ground. The view showed a frightening, inhospitable mountain range, all covered in snow and ice. But in the very center, there was a valley teeming with greenery. Zooming in, Nemesis could see that the very air was choked with clouds of warm steam. All around was a beautiful but dangerous tropical rainforest, teeming with snakes hanging from the twisted branches in the canopy of the forest, some of which breathed fire. There was no mistaking where this was. This was the jungle of the Wise Serpent, named for the legend of the elder snake fairy who taught the jungle's residents the art of Chi combat, a style of martial arts that combined physical movements with spellcasting. Nemesis didn't really care about the Altarians' paltry little stories. It was more interested in finding Yuki. Its magical sensing powers led it to a mountain in the distance, this one much taller and darker than the others. Looking closer, it realized that this was Mount Inferno. Everyone in Alterus knew to stay away from Mount Inferno. The mountain housed some of the worst criminals the world knew. Guarding it was the fearsome lava dragon Grimhide. Standing nearly as tall as the mountain itself, Grimhide could bring a whole battalion of Wendigos down with just one fiery breath. Nemesis gulped, remembering how the lava dragon decimated entire armies of Wendigos during the war. It made sense that Grimhide would be guarding Mount Inferno. What criminal would even try to escape, knowing that they would have to face such a formidable beast? But then another thought came to Nemesis. If Grimhide was guarding Mount Inferno, he would not let Jack Thunder in so easily either. The lava dragon might barbecue him alive before he even had a chance to get in the door. For some reason, Nemesis didn't laugh at that thought. It didn't need those kids to die. It just needed them out of the way. It needed to get Yuki away from them. Even if it couldn't destroy the Fragments of Anima, it could still hide them where the team could never find them. And if they were missing even one of the fragments, it would be enough to stop them from halting the Heart of Darkness's return to Alterus. Nemesis sighed. It really didn't understand. Maybe it didn't matter. It would find some way to stop Jack Thunder from getting Yuki, no matter what.